The film begins by showing a group of tough fighters from the United States called Black Swan. They're led by a seasoned leader named William Lewis, and they're sent to Georgia to take care of a gas pipeline project. Their orders come from a top-secret agent from the British SAS named George Clements. George tells William that they need to make sure the gas pipeline project goes smoothly, no matter what challenges come up. He warns that some locals who don't want to sell their land for the project could be a threat to the Black Swan Group. Shortly after, William responds that there's no need to worry because his own daughter, Grace Lewis, is part of the army and would be willing to attack and kill the civilians if necessary. Later, the Black Swan troops encounter the locals and start attacking them immediately. This leads to a huge, intense battle between the civilians and the soldiers. During the conflict, Grace ordered her team to ruthlessly kill all the adult males in the area and spare the women, with the intention of instilling fear and terror into the survivors. The battle continued throughout the night, resulting in the horrific deaths of many innocent civilians. Little did the Black Swan know, their cruel actions had been secretly captured on camera by one of the female villagers. Meanwhile, in London, a SAS agent named Thomas Buckingham visited a castle to retrieve a ring that had belonged to his parents, as he planned to propose to his girlfriend soon. However, the viral footage of the massacre committed by the Black Swan had sparked worldwide outrage, with many countries suspecting that Britain had played a role in sending the group to the village, considering that the gas pipeline project was a British government initiative. As a result, Interpol issued a red notice or direct order to the SAS, with instructions to eliminate the entire Black Swan team if it was confirmed that the British government had no involvement in the brutal attack. Meanwhile, in the British government office, the Prime Minister, Atwood, gave an order to George to deploy British SAS troops to put an end to the Black Swan Group. Although they were reluctant, they were compelled to do so in order to make the Black Swan Group the scapegoat and avoid being held responsible for any crimes against the people of Georgia. The British had actually sent the Black Swans to assassinate the citizens, but they were now forced to betray them to improve their image, which had been badly tarnished in the eyes of the world. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a female doctor named Sophie Hart was taken aback by the arrival of her boyfriend, Thomas. He had already purchased tickets for a trip to Paris, which he had planned as a surprise for Sophie. However, he had a secret plan to ask Sophie to marry him during their vacation. As they chatted, Thomas received an unexpected assignment from his SAS superiors to surround the Black Swan, who was currently hiding in a secure location. At the same time, Grace received a message from her informant revealing that George and Prime Minister Atwood had terminated their contract with the Black Swan Group. However, Grace already knew that the British government would send SAS troops to wipe out their group. On the other hand, William, the leader of the Black Swan and Grace's father, instructed Grace and the other members to quickly escape to the United States via Paris, while he and some guards would try to fend off the approaching SAS troops. After several hours, Thomas arrived at the Black Swan headquarters, disguised as a cleaning service officer who was going to inspect every house. He told them that the cleanest house would receive an award from the cleaning service. However, Colleen, a Black Swan member, immediately kicked Thomas out, as his house was messy. On one occasion, he finally managed to paralyze her by stabbing her in the neck. Meanwhile, in another location, Major Bissett, the leader of the British SAS troops, was assigned by Prime Minister Atwood to lead the mission to capture the Black Swan Group. There, he reminded the SAS troops not to use excessive force and not to cause any casualties. But, unfortunately, the situation on the ground did not go as planned, as the SAS troops were immediately attacked by the Black Swan troops. On the other hand, the SAS managed to corner William, who was the leader of the Black Swan squad. George, who didn't see Grace, ordered the others to keep searching until they found her. Without thinking, he finished off William. Meanwhile, Thomas and a friend continued searching for Grace until they saw a woman who looked like her. However, the woman turned out to be a terrorist planning to detonate a bomb. There, he was forced to shoot her, and the bomb exploded, but Thomas and his friend managed to avoid it by jumping out the window. After the mission, Major Bissett was angry with Thomas for violating operational procedures by killing a woman, even though he had acted in self-defense. At that time, Thomas was temporarily relieved of duty as a punishment for the violation. Despite the sanction, he felt happy because he could finally take a vacation with Sophie to Paris, where he planned to propose to her. Bryce, his friend and SAS agent, joked that Thomas should hurry up and have children. After the mission, Thomas went to see Sophie to ease his homesickness and treat a scratch on his temple. He asked her about the plane ticket he had given her earlier, but she preferred to travel to Paris by train to enjoy the journey together. Eventually, he agreed to go by train with her. However, on the same train, a woman in a wheelchair went to the toilet, and it turned out to be Grace. At that time, Grace and her troops planned to take revenge on the British by destroying a gas pipe above the railroad. When a railroad official hurriedly went to the toilet, an angry Grace ruthlessly killed him. Later, Thomas went to the toilet and saw Grace coming out. Shockingly, he found a dead officer in the toilet. Then, he immediately called Bryce, who was at the SAS office, to inform him that Grace was on the same train. Meanwhile, inside the SAS headquarters, Major Bissett was secretly texting Grace. It was later revealed that he was the one who leaked internal information to the Black Swan squad. After receiving news from Major Bissett, Grace quickly took action by hijacking the train. Her fellow Black Swan members turned off the CCTV and electricity and set fire to the train carriages, creating a puff of smoke. When the fire department arrived, they turned out to be the Black Swan members in disguise. At that time, Thomas realized that they were the Black Swan and tried to fight them off, even though he was alone. When an explosion occurred, he rushed to Sophie to make sure she was safe. He also contacted a Central SAS member to ask why the SAS troops had not arrived yet. While the Black Swan searched for him on the train, he managed to escape before they found him. Shortly after, Thomas contacted Bryce and shared a photo of Grace's new look, which he had managed to capture. He also informed George about it. However, Major Bissett asked for the photo and immediately gave it to Grace. Meanwhile, some Black Swan members started drilling a tunnel above the train, which was located on top of a gas pipeline, with the intention of blowing it up with a bomb they had prepared. Not long after, Grace received a message from Major Bissett that a troublesome SAS member named Thomas was on the train and the Black Swan troops should immediately kill him. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she ordered her team to find Thomas and confiscate all cell phones of the passengers on the train. However, Sophie was quick to think and hid her phone in her shoe while giving someone else's phone, which had already been shot. Meanwhile, the media in England was buzzing with news of the train hijacking carried out by the Black Swan. The Prime Minister, Atwood, was furious with their actions and ordered George to lead SAS operations to bring the Black Swan group down. Later, Grace displayed her ruthless nature by shooting a passenger for no apparent reason. But when she realized that the shot had hit a child's hand, she asked the passengers for medical help to treat the child. It was revealed that she had plans to recruit the child to be a part of the Black Swan group in the future. Sophie, who needed first aid medicine, quickly volunteered to treat the child, and Grace allowed her to take the child to the toilet where the first aid kit was kept. At the same time, Major Bissett and his men arrived at the train tunnel. Soon after, they quickly prepared for an attack and approached the hijacked train. Not long after, George arrived and took command of the mission as he had been ordered by Prime Minister Atwood. This caused some objection from Major Bissett, who had previously conspired with the Black Swan. Meanwhile, Thomas realized that Sophie was in the toilet and tried to convince her to leave with him. However, she refused and instead instructed Thomas to take the injured girl with him. There, she wanted to stay on the train to help other injured passengers. She also advised Thomas to hit his head to avoid being suspected by the Black Swan. As the SAS troops began to move in, the Black Swan group was already prepared as they had received information from Major Bissett. Suddenly, a fierce exchange of gunfire ensued between the SAS and Black Swan troops. During the fight, some SAS members suspected that there was a traitor among them who had conspired with the enemy. They believed this because the Black Swan group seemed to know about their arrival. Meanwhile, Grace contacted the SAS troops and presented them with two options. In order to resolve the conflict in Georgia, there were two options presented to the British. The first was to confess to the public that they hired the Black Swan group to harm the citizens, and the second was to give the group a whopping $500 million. At that time, George decided to opt for the latter, on the condition that the Black Swan group release the hostages on the train. Meanwhile, Thomas and Olivia were still together, but he instructed her to continue alone towards the end of the tunnel. This was because there were already SAS troops waiting for her. But suddenly, a faction of the Black Swan group arrived at the scene, and it seemed like a confrontation between Thomas and the group was inevitable. On the train, Grace was trying to get information from Sophie about the identity of the person who had taken the child. However, Sophie denied any knowledge of the matter. Her claims were weakened by the fact that the cell phone she had provided earlier did not actually belong to her. This made her position increasingly difficult. On the other hand, Thomas had already learned of the Black Swan's plan to destroy the gas pipe, and he started to take them out one by one. Meanwhile, George and Major Bissett went to Grace to negotiate a resolution. However, she abruptly killed Major Bissett, claiming that she detested traitors. Afterwards, there was a heated argument between Grace and George, during which he criticized her and her troops for failing to carry out their responsibilities, resulting in their actions being exposed to the public. Despite this, George and Prime Minister Atwood had paid a hefty sum to the Black Swan group to attack Georgia and massacre its citizens. Grace then demanded that George hand over the $500 million ransom within 30 minutes. Unbeknownst to him, one of Grace's associates had secretly recorded his conversation about hiring the Black Swan group with Prime Minister Atwood. Grace then ordered the video to be uploaded to social media to expose the British and Black Swan group's conspiracy. Meanwhile, Thomas contacted Bryce to inform him that the Black Swan group still intended to blow up the gas pipe in revenge. Therefore, it was crucial to launch an attack against them immediately, rather than paying the ransom, to prevent harm to the train's passengers. Upon receiving Thomas's message, Bryce immediately contacted Grace. It was revealed that they were working together all along. He then informed her that Thomas was pursuing the Black Swan group because Sophie, his girlfriend, was among the hostages. After receiving the information from Bryce, Grace declared that she no longer required the services of a SAS traitor like him. Meanwhile, George, who was present, overheard the conversation between them without making a sound. Grace then sent a message to Thomas, urging him to surrender before they harm Sophie. Fortunately, Thomas spotted a member of the Black Swan group and swiftly took him hostage. When he met with Grace, it turned out that the person he had captured was her older sibling, Oliver Lewis, who was a member of the Black Swan group. However, Grace fired a shot at Thomas, allowing Oliver to flee. Once Oliver had escaped, Grace and he took Sophie with them, and they made their escape through the gas pipeline. It was the same pipeline that they intended to use to flee from the train. Soon after, Thomas continued to pursue them relentlessly, determined to rescue his girlfriend. There, Oliver advised Grace to flee with Sophie while he confronted Thomas. Consequently, a fierce battle ensued between Thomas and Oliver. After a grueling fight, he ultimately defeated and killed Oliver. On the other hand, the SAS troops successfully saved the hostages by rescuing them. The remaining members of the Black Swan attempted to disguise themselves as train passengers. However, the SAS sniper troops had access to the identities of the Black Swan members, and without hesitation, they immediately eliminated them all at once. In the end, all members of the Black Swan had been killed, but they were annoyed that they had failed to capture Grace, who was the mastermind behind the Black Swan Forces rebellion. The center shifts to Grace, who is still attempting to flee while taking Sophie with her. After a short while, Thomas catches up with them, and Grace, feeling cornered, expresses her frustration by detonating a bomb installed in the gas pipe. The explosion results in George and Bryce being crushed by a train wreckage. At that time, George was severely injured and attempted to ask Bryce for assistance. However, Bryce refused and chose to steal the $500 million instead. Meanwhile, Grace injures Sophie's leg and runs away, hoping that Thomas will stop pursuing her. However, after Thomas approaches Sophie, she tells him that he does not need to worry about her and that it would be best for him to continue pursuing Grace. Upon hearing this, he decides to continue his hunt for her. On the other hand, the whole world is scandalized by the British Prime Minister's shady dealings for money. This was revealed after George shared a video confession implicating the Prime Minister's involvement with the Black Swan. Meanwhile, Grace is hiding on a train and attempts to kill Thomas. However, he manages to corner her and intends to kill her. Feeling trapped, she tries to seduce Thomas by offering him leadership of the Black Swan. She believes that with his skills, he can lead the organization to greater heights. Hearing that, Thomas seems interested in the proposition, but it was just a ploy, and he promptly eliminates Grace without hesitation. Long story short, Thomas proposes to Sophie in Paris, but she rejects his proposal, as she wants to marry him immediately. Eventually, he marries her. However, shortly after their wedding, Thomas is contacted by his boss, who informs him that they have located Bryce, the traitor who stole $500 million. Then, he is tasked with retrieving the stolen funds, and Sophie demands that her husband catch the rogue Bryce. The film ends. The moral lesson of the film is that violence and cruelty always have consequences, and it is important to treat others with kindness and respect, rather than resorting to aggression and brutality.